This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, Carlos. Who are you?
I am a restorative justice coordinator and teacher.
Who are you?
I am a father, husband, and son.
Who are you?
I am a author and a curriculum developer.
Who are you?
I am someone that cares deeply about the work of restoring ourselves.
Who are you?
I am someone that is in the work of restorative justice, not just because I found out about it in a book or a conference. It actually, there's a deeper meaning with it, and you're going to learn about it today with my family and how it ties into my life.
Who are you?
I am someone that is open and always willing to have those deep conversations and go there with people.
And finally, who are you?
I am someone that is ready to, help people in any which way that I can, and making myself available to do so.
Hey folks, I'm Elise, your producer, and I am so excited to introduce Carlos J. Malave as our guest today. Carlos J. Malave is the author of Translating Your Success and has also developed the Restorative Power Program after years of being an educator in the classroom. Carlos has also been a mentor for troubled youths. As a child, Carlos was successful in sports but lagged behind in his academics. After reflecting on his circumstances, Carlos realized that he could succeed in school by applying the same principles that made him a great athlete into being a good student. He translated his success from one area of his life to another, and now he's here to help all of the kids who may find themselves in the same boat. In this episode, you will hear a lot about practicing vulnerability and finding who you are. Before we get back into this episode, I do want to give a quick trigger warning because there is the mention of suicide and addiction from the timestamps 1319 to 2130 if that's not something you're looking to hear today. As always, please check out all of our workshops and courses, which can be found in the show notes below, as well as our YouTube channel and our Future Ancestors Collective. If you've ever gotten the chance to participate in some of our workshops, you might know Omi, who has been an amazing facilitator and an important part of Amplify RJ. They are ready to spread their wings and fly out of Amplify RJ, but not without an Amplify RJ send-off for Omi on June 30th. The information is in the show notes below, and without further ado, let's get back into this episode.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of who you are. We're going to get into a lot of that in a moment, but it's always good to check in. So to the fullest extent that you want to answer the question, how are you?
I'm doing well. It was a crazy year in education, business-wise and as a teacher. And it's finally came to an end. So I'm more relieved now, ready to reset and get a little bit of a break before starting up again for the next school year.
Yeah, what does rest in that break look like for you?
Vacation and traveling, especially after the pandemic, being able to just really get away from everything and allow myself to be present and disconnect from everything, and be with my daughter and my wife.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And it's not something that I'm getting to practice, not until I've scheduled something for mid-July, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the need to be away from the grind is so real. I guess like in the midst of that, how did you stay centered, grounded to the extent that you were able to do through the school year?
I think having those conversations, those tough conversations, being honest with myself and building that awareness. I think we get so lost in everything that is consuming us that we don't take a second to breathe and actually see how we're really feeling and how, as you asked at the beginning, how are you, and really ask ourselves that on a daily basis. And you know, being able to take time throughout the day to just stop and pause and work on my breathing, and have those conversations with those people that are important to me, and be realistic about what's going on with me.
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about how, the first relationship that we have is the relationship with ourselves. And
Hmm.
I'm not always someone who practices what I quote unquote preach, right? Especially when it comes to taking care of self. And it's not enough to just check in, right? It's about being responsive to those check-ins. So
Yeah,
when I'm saying like, oh, you know what? Like, I'm really tired this morning because I stayed up till 4 last
yeah,
night working on, XYZ thing for this summer. It's like, all right, so David, what are you going to do about that? And the answer to that this morning was like, drink some tea and like jump on this podcast recording. But like, I've got to like public accountability, right? I've got to carve out time today
yeah,
to just be, and recoup from what was an 18-hour workday yesterday, which,
yeah.
you know,
It's crazy.
yeah, for sure.
And
Um,
I think it's important. I'm sorry to cut you off. I think it's important that you brought that up because I think aligning everything to your life, to my life in particular, has helped me. So, like the stuff that I teach within schools, my business, even the person I'm married to, it's all about addressing those things. You know what I mean? And having those conversations. So I think with time, it's all about aligning your lifestyle to your work, which will always remind you, like I'm teaching the practices of, how to be self-aware, how to have those conflict resolution conversations, and how to address everything that you're going through to get to the root. When I'm speaking at schools, when I'm working within the school that I'm in daily, when I'm, talking with my wife or my child, it's always present. So I think for me and for everybody, it's all about finding a way to align what you do with your lifestyle to always keep that accountability with yourself.
Yeah, I mean, and you talked about in your "Who Are You" responses that restorative justice for you is not about the job of being a restorative justice coordinator at a school. It's something that is aligned to who you are in your family, right? In those relationships. I'm curious how this work got started for you, and even before you knew the word restorative justice.
Yeah. Yeah. As I noted earlier, I've been in education for 10 plus years, teaching all different subjects. In 2015, I'm originally from New York, and I got an opportunity to teach this new course called eighth grade seminar, where you're getting kids high school ready. And it was in Texas. I applied, and it seemed like a really cool position to do. I've never done that particular position before, and the school never done it before. So I had a lot of opportunity to create. So when I got there, I'm teaching kids life skills and trying to connect it to things that I'm doing. Along with doing that, I was speaking around the world, and building my business as a speaker, motivational speaker, and trying to find my niche, right? Because as a speaker, you're always trying to find what is it that you can connect with people with, where it's not, everybody goes through this as a speaker. Like you go out there, you test the waters, and then it gets to a point where you're like, okay, who are you? Like, how are you going to help? You know what I mean? And not sound like everybody else, right? So around that time, it was like kind of a unique situation because I've really got an opportunity to answer those questions for myself while I'm teaching these kids. And eighth grade isn't the easiest bunch, right? So going in, teaching them life skills like how to present yourself in a conversation with an interview, or how to present yourself when something difficult comes up, how to address it. So I'm doing all these things, not knowing what restorative practices or restorative justice is. And then my dean of culture on campus at Yes Prep in Texas that year, he had me working with his kids that were getting in trouble in school and having difficulty in school. So I would like talk to them and work with them. And then he told me, hey, have you ever heard of restorative justice? I was like, no, what is that? He told me about it, about getting to the root cause of things and a different way of looking at discipline. It's a lot of what you talk about similar. Why don't you do this conference? So I did the conference, and then ironically, while I did the conference, it went amazing. And a KIPP school was there. I think about like 50 KIPP students and then a couple admin, where they all ran back to the principal that Monday. It was on a Saturday, that Monday. And then I got a call that Tuesday telling me like, hey, I heard amazing things about you. We would like to hire you, right? As a seminar teacher on our campus at this KIPP high school. And I already had a nice position at my school. So I decided to stay and then collab with the high school and do speaking engagement, implement my book, translating your success into their curriculum as a freshman seminar on their campus. And it went really well. And I was able to build relationships, because the unique thing with me when I speak, I don't like going on a particular time and then speaking and leaving. What I like to do is fully engage into the community and see what it's about. So I'm there at 7:45 when the doors open. I'm greeting kids. I'm sitting in classrooms. I have lunch with kids, and then I speak, right? And then I stay after and build that rapport, because I always felt like, say you write this amazing speech and then you go to the environment and it's not for them. So what are you going to do? So like, I like to feel it out. So I did that several times throughout the next year with that KIPP school while I was working at this Yes Prep. And then the next year after that, he offered me a restorative justice coordinator position on that campus at KIPP Houston High School. And that's where everything blossomed, where I was responsible for dealing with conflict and running circles and building relationship with staff and students alike. But I had this one course that they wanted me to teach with a council of students, juniors and seniors. So the unique thing was like, they were like, hey, why don't you train them and create something? So what I did was I trained them in conflict resolution skills. I gave them circle leading skills. We read a book and did practices of radical candor written by Kim Scott, where you learn how to be compassionate and direct with your leadership. And it got so good that we started having the kids deal with the situation. So I'll be like, Ibrahim, there's a kid having a breakdown in Miss Timothy's class. Can you go up there and see what's going on, run a circle and all that? So they became the first line of defense. I used my network speaking. We did presentations neighboring schools. And then we were able to get a feature on ABC News, which was phenomenal. And it went amazing. And then, I'm finding my footing. I'm loving the work. And then on January 10th, 2019, my father committed suicide. And it came to a whole different level because my dad was a product of the school to prison pipeline. My dad had went to Rikers Island, one of the worst prisons in New York, when I was a freshman in college, right? So like, he was a product of not being able to resolve conflict, not having the skills to articulate yourself and express yourself and find the power and vulnerability. So it was very traumatic. I had to go to therapy myself. And then I had to ask myself again, like, who am I, right? What am I about? I'm doing this work. I'm preaching to these students to do something. Am I going to run away from it? Or I'm going to actually take the things that I've built with these kids and actually use it to save my life? And that's what I did. And I went back, finished up the year. Things were changing. And, my wife said, take the year and build your business. So I took what I built with that class. I wrote the curriculum, lesson plans, assessments, aligned it to state standards, and made it measurable. And then I started working with schools across the country to implement the restorative power curriculum. And that's what I'm doing now, along with I got hired as a restorative power teacher. That's never been done before at an elementary, and I'm teaching kindergarten to sixth graders about what is toxic behavior, how to address that, how to build proper relationships. So that's what I'm currently doing now in the work of restorative justice, restorative practices.
Yeah. Oh man. So one, thank you for sharing all of that, especially about your experience within your family of the loss of your dad. I'm very sorry about that.
Thank you.
And I think full stop. There are things that I want to go back to about restorative justice, but
Yeah.
because you brought that up, if you want to, I'm curious, what was it like using restorative ways of being to navigate that situation?
Yeah, and that's a part of my work, my consultant company, and my curriculum. Restorative power it's a lifestyle. It's not something you do within the confines of 6 to 8 hours a day,
Mhm.
right? It has to fully be implemented in as a friend, a son, a student, a partner, and honestly, that's what I did. Like I started, it's made me a better father, a better husband, a better brother to my siblings, a better friend all around. And I just started really specifically trying to be more present, right? And really allowing myself to go there in conversations and be genuine with people and not be afraid of rejection, or not be afraid of, oh, they know too much, and that's what I kept going in my head. I had a lot of See, my dad struggled with drugs and alcohol. He was an amazing father, but he was like a functional alcoholic. He would disappear for like a weekend and then show up on Monday morning at 4 a.m. at work as a construction worker for 30 plus years. So he was like a functional one, so which was gave him the excuse, right? Like he can still function and do what he had to do. But the main thing with my father, he struggled with being himself and acting like he was okay with things that he wasn't okay with, right? And he built this exterior of like, I'm okay or I'm tough, right? And if you see my dad was into bodybuilding. He was fit. He was good looking. He dressed well. So when he passed, everybody was in shock. But my father, I had growing up, I felt weird because my dad, he would talk to me about things that I don't think he should have been talking to me from a very young age. From the age of 9, he was coming to me about relationship advice with my mom. He was telling me things about what he was going through. I had those tough conversations with him, and I allowed myself to go there with him. And I wrote it in my book. The first chapter of my book, I wrote about how I found out addiction was real by finding him in a tub, blacked out, trying to wake himself up, fully clothed. And I grew up angry, like getting in fights with him, like saying, "Why don't you just stop drinking?" And everything changed when I allowed myself to ask different questions. Why do you drink? What causes you to go there? And then I had those conversations, and I'm like, oh, he had abuse. He didn't have role models. He felt like he couldn't be himself. So when he used the substance, he can actually free himself. Oh, okay. So if I just allow myself to go there, I wouldn't need a substance to get me there. So that became my mentality growing up. And then when my father's situation happened, to tie it all together to answer your question, those memories kept coming back of like, what my father struggled with, and what didn't allow him to live, and me being present about what am I going to do to not repeat that. And it all aligned to the restorative practices, having those when someone does something in the moment that's uncomfortable, and it could be a close friend, it could be a relative, checking them and saying, hey, I'm not cool with that. Don't say that. That's not cool, right? And I learned this from my wife as well, because it's like she says it all the time. It's better to be uncomfortable for 5 minutes than 5 months, right? People are so afraid of making people uncomfortable in a couple moments that they allow themselves to be uncomfortable for months and years after, right? I learned this specifically when I was getting to know my wife as friends. We were friends, right? And we were joking and laughing somewhere we were at, and we were joking and laughing. And I had said, I had cursed, right? I was like, F you, like jokingly or whatever. And in that moment, she stopped in her tracks and was like, don't curse around me. I don't want you to feel comfortable cursing when you're good, and then when we're bad, you're gonna feel like you're allowed to do that. We're not gonna be that type of friendship or a relationship. It's not going like that. And then she stopped and then continued the conversation like nothing happened. I was like she jabbed me in the throat. And then for me, I wanted to continue being in her life, so I haven't cursed since. And that's what I remember when dealing with people, right? You're going to make them uncomfortable. But at the beginning stages, if you let it be known what is not okay with you, what is okay with you, right? Then if they want to stay, they'll pay attention to that. And I'm proof of that, because I haven't cursed like that in front of my wife for 10 years, right? Because of that moment. And we have to allow ourselves to do that. And if my father was able to do that, I felt like it was okay for that and for him to be vulnerable and not being seen as weak when he's vulnerable, then he probably would have had the skills to still be alive. So that's how I was able to get through it. Those are the thoughts that went in through my mind when I was building my curriculum, when I was trying to survive through this whole tragic event in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for modeling that vulnerability here. Now, I think I I will blame or I will assign blame to like my socialization as a man in the culture that we grew up in. Is like that's something that I struggle with as well. And like when I share, like I do it in pretty calculated ways, right? And like here on a podcast, right? Like you're not sharing things that you haven't shared and worked through before, and I don't think like this is necessarily the space to like work out all of those feelings. But as I'm thinking about what it looks like to live this way, I think about all the ways that I hold myself back from saying, from articulating just needs and desires in given moments with my partner, right? In the context of friendships, maybe not so much, but like with family, and even like in business relationships, like, there are lots of ways to define restorative justice, from, indigenous ways of being, living values of interconnection to, people who are most impacted by the harm, like coming together to figure out how to meet the needs. I think another way that one of my mentors, Cheryl, who's, first episode of this podcast, talks about, oftentimes it comes down to like the questions that we ask ourselves, like the check-in, like, how are you, right? And what do you need, right? And like being responsive to those needs. And when you don't articulate those needs to people, they can't meet them, right?
Exactly.
When you, and like that builds resentment from you because they're not meeting your need.
Exactly.
But like nobody's a mind reader. And, like there's so much to go on. Thank you so much. When you were originally introduced to like the term restorative justice at that conference, right? Like, what was it about it that like was like, oh yeah, this is it for you?
I think the term that kept on resonating with me and my work, and really caught my interest, was getting to the root, getting to the root of everything. And, aligning that to my lifestyle and wanting to be a part of that. Like, I really wanted to understand why people do what they do. Why do they feel the way they feel? And then while doing that, figuring out why I do what I do. Why do I feel the way that I feel? And fully engaging in that work is what allowed me to do what I've been able to do over the last couple of years, and just stay true to that. I want to get to the root cause of everything that I go through, everything that I feel, and that will allow me to build relationships and be present and self-aware of everything that goes on with me and around me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you're doing that, it's just like about that alignment that you were
Hmm.
talking about. And it doesn't mean that's always comfortable and that's always
Yeah.
easy. I'm curious, in the course of being a restorative justice coordinator in schools specifically,
Yeah.
what were moments where you had to check yourself into alignment when other people who might not have understood the fullness of what restorative justice
Oh,
was? Yeah.
yeah, that happens all the time. I think schools are set up to be punitive,
Hmm.
right? Where, it's somebody does something, they get a discipline, they get a consequence. And, we could go into statistics. I know your show is about restorative justice in the work. That doesn't work, right? The whole idea of suspension and kicking kids out and making them, feel like what they did was so bad and not having those conversations does not work. So for me, is constantly being true to it all around holistically. I think in schools, I've been working from schools in New York all the way to Texas, and consulting schools all over the country. Um, the teachers need it just as bad as
Hmm.
the students. And that's the thing. Teachers, as a whole, I grew up in it. I've been teaching for over 10 years. Teachers are just students that that had the support and just naturally knew how to fall in line and go through the process of moving up in schools, right?
Playing the
Now, when
game.
you play the game, basically, and when you're dealing with students that don't fit the mold, it's confusing. It seems like it's alarming. It's like, what do I do? And if you look at most of the successful people in the world, they were extroverts. They were different. They were thought outside the box, right? So I think most teachers, right, and some have done the work in their lives and were able to get in a better place, but most teachers, especially coming out of college and being thrown into the world of education, don't know who they are and haven't addressed the stuff in their life. And then they're walking into these spaces expecting students to do it when they don't do it with their own peers. If you're not walking that walk in your world with your peers, your relatives, your friends, and then you walk into this space of students trying to, with everything they're going through, and then you're trying to present yourself in this way, they can smell fake from a mile away. That's the first thing you will learn as a teacher. Students will smell fake from a mile away. And if you don't address your stuff in your own life, don't come into these walls in these spaces where you're trying to get the student to express everything they're going through, yet you're not owning your vulnerability and owning your stuff, right? And then you're coming into these spaces trying to get to know the kids on a whole nother level, but you're not giving them anything, right? And that's the power of vulnerability, right? There's power in knowing it. I've learned this through with my speaking. After my dad's passing, which was traumatic, I had a speaking engagement where every time I had an engagement at my alumni at SUNY Cortland, upstate New York, or in a school in New York, I would drive up with my dad and we would have these long conversations and really express, and we cried and we laughed and we had these tough conversations about life with my father, which I really enjoyed and happy that we were able to do. I had one of those set up a month after he had committed suicide.
Mhm.
And I pushed myself. I took my uncle with me. And I did the same thing that I used to do with my dad and have those conversations and, and go there. Um, but I remember going up and speaking for the first time about it. And I got choked up. I got emotional. I teary eyed. It was hard as hell to do. Um, but I pushed through. And then I had another engagement a month later and it became easier. And the more I talked about it, the more power I had behind it. And I understood it more every time I expressed it. And that's the unique thing that I learned about therapy. My dad used to go to therapy all the time. I was like, oh, that's crap. They don't tell me nothing. They don't give me no answers. This is stupid. I'm wasting money. And I kind of fell into that, like thinking that's what therapy was until I went. And then I realized, because my wife kept telling me, just go, just go. You need a space to go. And I'm like, why? And then I understood once I got there, like I started expressing myself and letting it out, right? In this space for me to understand it better so that when I go back to my wife, I'm not just dropping it on her. Right. And then I was like, oh, I'm paying for this space. I don't have to worry about this person's emotions when I'm expressing it. Right. I let it all out. I understand it better. And then I go back to my wife, and then there can be more balance, right? In that relationship. So I know I went off on different tangents there, but
Yeah.
basically, I mean, when it comes to the work of restorative justice that I kept on dealing with within schools, it's like they bring me in to deal with the students, but I address it right away. It's the staff that needs to be addressed first, right?
So yeah, that's where this conversation started. Like
yeah,
this,
yeah,
but I do think it's like that internal work that we're asking students to behave one way. There's I've quoted this in like probably the last 3 podcasts, but like James Baldwin talks about, children aren't very good at like doing what you tell them to do, but they've never failed to do what they see modeled,
exactly.
right? And
Exactly.
so we've got to do, as adults in the building, we've got to do that internal work. I would also say, as like people who are administrators in the building working with staff, you also have to be modeling that work. I do want to acknowledge the thing that you were talking about with, therapy being a space to express and not have to worry about the other person's emotions. I have participated in therapy before, and like in a lot of ways I feel bad about that, because like, no,
Yeah.
like I know I'm paying you, but like you're still a full human who
Yeah,
like
yeah.
has a dog, who has a partner, who has like all these things going on in your life. Like I feel like I'm monopolizing the space, and therapy has its place, and I've engaged in that in different times. What I've also found healing is building community around circle practices, right? Where the circle, I've participated in men's circles, right? Where we come together and just like talk the stuff that I'll say we come together and we just talk the shit that like we need to get out, like whatever is present, right?
Yeah.
Of course, like whatever is said in circles stays in that circle, but like when you're in a group of people who've come together to hold space for each other, and everything is accepted, whatever comes out, whether it's celebrating like the great things that you've done, that's totally welcome. But it's also very often the struggles that we're having, either with work, with our relationships, the anger that we're dealing with, the addictions that we're dealing with, like those can also be super powerful spaces that we don't necessarily have to rely on Western constructs of like medicine and therapy to get help and meet our needs. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, I agree with everything you just said.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to, what it was like to have those conversations with teachers, staff, adults in the building, who were like, why aren't you, like these kids are just getting away with whatever, you're just talking to them, right? And I think like reclaiming the phrase discipline, right? Being discipline is about how you teach. And like consequences are just whatever happens after, right? Like they don't have to be punishments, right? It's like, what are we doing to restore? Like, how did you navigate those conversations? Because like as a restorative justice coordinator, right, there are people who are up against that.
No, absolutely. And I think that's where the power of vulnerability really goes into alignment, right? Where I use my message, I use my experience with my father. I learned this a long time ago. How do you get someone to think about their mother? You talk about your mother, right? And that is the same thing. How do you get people to really think about this work? It's really you diving in and sharing to the extreme level. In this work, in my line of work, the way I connect is telling the story about my dad, and really getting people to understand that this is bigger than what we're doing in schools. My dad lost his life because he didn't build these skills. Now, what are you not doing, right? What are you causing to not resolve throughout your life, right? That's causing you to not be the best educator that you can be. So I address it that way from a holistic point of view before I ever get into the conversation of in the classroom, right? And then usually people open up, right? They start opening up about their own experiences, and then they start aligning it themselves. And I help them connect the dots, how that stuff out there is connecting to your inability or your struggles within the classroom. And that's what is the work of restorative power. When I come in, I don't, point the finger. I'm like, I go in, I'm the example. I fully allow myself to go there with people. And then I put them in, when I do engagements, I don't just speak for 45 minutes. It's I show, you do, you go out and try it out. You have those conversations and you speak about it, right? And I put them in those scenarios to actually express themselves. And I keep on pushing them like, hey, it doesn't matter how many people know your stuff, because the more you talk about it, the more you know it, and you know it better than anybody else. There's power in that. We need to let go of that, especially in these spaces where we're really trying to create an impact with students and really save lives, right? Because that's what everybody talks about. I want to come in and save lives, right? Or help to an extreme level. But we can't do that if we're not allowing ourselves to have those conversations about our own situations, right? And I'm not saying go into the classroom and do that there, right? Like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. No, what I'm saying is deal with yourself outside so that when you get inside the classroom, you're aware of what it looks like. When a kid curses me out and flips over a table, that's a cry for help. If you haven't done the work within yourself, you would see that as a personal attack. And that is the difference. I've mentored, I've dealt with football looking kids that are towering over me. And I've realized, like, if they're screaming, I stay low. I bring them down to my tone, right? And I don't, they come down to me because I'm calm. I can see them, and I let them feel like I see you, right? And bringing that down. But if you haven't addressed things in your own life, you can't do that in a school environment. So that's where it goes to, oh, I need to call the dean. I need to get this kid escorted. I need to, where you're not paying attention to what escalated it in the first place, right? You're not paying attention to the cues, right? Because if you're functioning in your world as ignore, let it build, when a kid is in the class building it, you're not aware of when you can stop it before the table flips over and the kid is like, F you. You understand? So that is the type of work that I address when I deal with staff. Is like, no, like, this is how it happens. We are trained to ignore. We are trained to just deal. The first thing we're told when we're in the household is whatever happens in the household stays in the household. That is where it starts, right? So how do you flip that on its head? Like, how do you become aware of that and then say, no, like, I need to express more. I need to find spaces where I can express more. For me, like, from learning that from therapy, going to therapy has allowed me to build better relationships with men, right? I used to just go play basketball and just talk the shit and then, go on. But like now I catch myself, like, we play ball, we talk, and then we really get to know each other. I'm having conversations about family, about upbringing that I never used to have before on the side of a basketball court after we just played, right? And I'm allowing myself to go there from the experience of my dad and therapy and understanding, like, no, this is healing for me. This is me knowing myself better so that when I go in these spaces of teaching, it comes off genuine and it's not an act, because that's what's happening with teachers and administrators within schools. We're trained to be actors. We're not really trained to really identify who we are. We figure that out through our own experiences, but we need to push that so that we can be the best educators. Because kids, like you said, like Baldwin said, kids follow what we do. And if we're ignoring, they're going to ignore, and then they're going to build it up. And they're not mature enough to deal with the emotions like we are. So they're flipping over, they're cursing out, they're having these moments, right? But we need to be able to deal with our stuff so that we can identify it building up within our students, and then we can address it better. So that's the kind of conversations I have to have the teachers open up and then deal. So after my speaking engagements, after my meetings with teachers, is what are you going to do when you go home? Who are you going to call? Who are you going to talk to? And that gets you a step closer to being able to sit in a classroom and hear a student, see a student, and get to know a student to help the student.
This is a free podcast, y'all. You just got hundreds, thousands of dollars worth of quote unquote professional development right here. And like, we can laugh about professional development, but like, this is really just about, how we live and move through the world. It's internal work first, relationship with yourself, and how all of that plays out into really about how am I stopping to do that work on myself when like you sense that something is wrong, instead of just pushing through, right?
Exactly.
That's something that that's what you get like 18-hour work days out of, right? Right.
Exactly.
That's so challenging, so convicting. You've shared a lot. I'm curious if there's been a moment where you're like, oh shit, like I messed this up, like doing restorative work, and what have you learned from it?
I think that happens all the time, and I think being perfect is unrealistic. You
Sure.
know, what I mean, it's all about having those conversations and allowing yourself to say, "Hey, I messed up," or "I was wrong about that," and this is what I've learned, right? And this is how I'm trying to correct it. I think it's always putting yourself in that place. I think accountability is key. Putting those people around you that are not afraid to tell you what needs to be said. I believe in that so much that I married the person that does that the most. Like my wife will be the first to tell me when I look stupid. And I need that. All my friends are people that are truth tellers, right? Because I am not one that is used to confrontation. I grew up in a household where chaos will be happening. And then, the doorbell rings and it's my grandparents and they was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And everything's like, so it's always avoiding and acting like you're okay. And confrontation is horrible. Don't touch that, or let's avoid that, right? And let it build up until like the person had enough, and then it's a huge fight, right? And I've seen that my whole life. It didn't work. So for me, it's like no, like I want people to be real with me. It's easy to get people to tell you what you want to hear. You know, what I mean, it's easy to get around those people. It's hard to find those truth tellers, and you got to find those people that are are in that space in their life and addressing things within their life to like tell you, no, that why did you say that? Why do you feel that way? My wife will hear me say something on a podcast or in a book that I'm writing and say, what are you trying? You know, you're coming off this way, right? Is that your intention? And I need that. You know what I mean? I need that. I have friends that are willing to have those conversations with me and stop me and check me. So I think the for me is always allowing myself to be corrected, always allowing myself to be wrong, um, and learning through it and being vulnerable about it. That's the power of vulnerability. You have to be okay with that part, right? And that's how you really build your reaction to it is what builds that relationship. Are you like, why did you say that? Like that's messed up, right? Then there's the reaction will cause a rift within the relationship. But if it's like, oh, I didn't know, because for me, it's like when someone tells me that they care about me, they want me to see something that I'm not seeing now. So I thank them for that. That's how I literally look at constructive feedback. The best thing about me is that I take feedback. Best. And I use that to in my work. Like I'm willing to hear you out. I'm willing to hear a student out because I can't be thinking that I'm on this high horse that I'm talking to students. I'm the best motivational speaker, but I can't hear a student tell me what I did wrong. That's ridiculous. Like I gotta hear from the students. I gotta hear from the staff. Like, hey, like you pushed a little too much there. Like I felt uncomfortable, and have those conversations, and then I get better through the experience. And I think doing that as a lifestyle with my daughter who's 7 and is willing to tell me that like correct me or like tell me something like I'm fully there, you know. So I think surrounding yourself around that is the best thing you can do to actually live the lifestyle of restoring yourself and others. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now, and constantly in search of getting better and being around people that will go there with me. So I enjoy that. It makes me better, and I want that.
Yeah. You've shared this in a lot of different ways, but I'm curious how you'll respond to it in this moment. You're still a young man. How do you want to continue to grow in this work?
I think just relationship building. I think that's the biggest thing. Every person that I interact with, every school that I work with, is bigger than me just being a consultant. It's bigger than me than just being someone that helps them figure out a problem or solve a problem. I want to build relationships. Like I really want people to know, I want to know them and I want them to know me on a personal level. So like the relationships that I've built with the schools that I've worked with, I've been able to achieve that. I want to continue to achieve that. For example, like the reason I was I was building my business for a whole year and a half, and then I get a call from um, a relationship that I built with the assistant principal at the high school that I was a restorative justice coordinator at. She started her own school, and she said, "I think your work was impactful. I love what you did with the high school students. Let's get them early. Do you want to teach your curriculum in my elementary kindergarten to six?"
Mm.
And I was like, yeah, I would love to, you know what I mean? And having those relationships like that, the school and New Visions for the Humanities in the Bronx that has implemented my curriculum over the last 2 years, going on 3 now. The whole staff, we talk, right? It's not just, you know what I mean? I reach out to the assistant principal and the principal, and it's more about like, hey, how you doing? How's the family? Right. So I think it's about that relationship piece, because, in this world, it's a need, and it could be caught in a way of like, hey, let me make more money. Let me get in this world so that I can, build my business, right? Or, you know what I mean? And I want to keep it genuine, because I think what I preach about, what I talk about, is about being whole and living it out. So with that, I want to continue to build these relationships with the staffs that I work with, the schools that I work with, the people that I meet, the people that I interact with, so that it can really continue to be a lifestyle for me.
Yeah. As someone who is, and this is just like advice for myself, right? Because I have you here, as someone who is like behind you, coming up behind you, in this work, doing similar things, right? How do you discern which relationships are right to continue to invest in, right? Because you can't be in a relationship with everybody.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah. There are infinite people in the world. There are only so many ways that you can direct your energy in any given time.
agreed. I think you stay consistent and you stay yourself, right? And then you pay attention to their reactions. And it's not like, oh, F that person. It's more like, oh, that person's not there yet, so I just can't go there with that person, right? And that's what it is. You got to understand, I wasn't always here. You know what I mean? I'm flawed. I'm very flawed, right? And it took a long process to get me here, right? And I've seen a lot of craziness. I told you a little pieces of my father and my upbringing, but I've seen a lot more craziness, right? So my thinking, I had to do a lot of unlearning. I had to do a lot of processing to really identify who I wanted to be and who I am today, right? And who I want to be in the future, right? So me understanding, like, learning this from my wife. And there's another aspect, like, is marriage is crazy, right? Because everybody changes. Every 5 years, you're a completely different person. Think about that. For you to ask somebody to grow at the same rate that you are is insane. So that's why you need to continue having those conversations every year. Like, hey, do you feel the same way? How are you about this? If you don't have those conversations, you're going to be caught up in a whole world of mess, because for you to think that that person is not changing, right? Or you're changing faster than that person, or vice versa, that stuff happens. So having those conversations, I think you putting yourself in a place of, hey, that person's not here yet. I allow myself to go there. I build that relationship. I stay consistent, but my awareness is there. Like, hey, this person's not there. So you just don't allow you see that they're not there. And then you just, you move forward saying, okay, I can't go there with this person. Right. But I wouldn't say change yourself, be consistent, be yourself, but be aware of people's reactions, and don't put too much judgment on them. Just be like, hey, they're not there yet. Right. And maybe your interaction with them will be something that will be a light bulb moment 5 years down the line for them, where they'll be like, oh, they want to get there now, right? But and like I said, it's difficult, it's hard, but there's power in vulnerability. I'm gonna keep saying that. The more I allow myself to go there and talk about these difficult things and all that, the more power I receive, right? The more understanding of myself and my story I get, and it doesn't matter who knows, who learns it, right? It's more about me understanding it better. So for me, and my advice to you is stay consistent, and just be aware and don't judge people so harshly, right? Because and I'm sure you would say the same about you. You're not perfect, and it took a process to get where you're at. Um, so when you're getting to know people and having these conversations with people, just allow yourself to be aware and know when to step back, right? Oh, this person isn't there yet, so I'm a step back a little, right? And I have those conversations with people, and they can go there. So I allow myself to go and just be aware, right? There's no judgment. There's no expectation. I think that's what I was trying to say. Don't expect anything from anybody. Just allow yourself to go there, and then pay attention to how they react, and where they go from there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And,
Okay.
This is like a pull behind the curtain for people listening. Like the real reason that I have this podcast is so I can talk to dope people like you and learn. And like you just fed me a lot. So thank you for being here. And tangential benefit, everybody else gets to listen to all of this and learn as well. I want to transition into the questions that everybody answers. We've talked about it in different ways, but for you, define restorative justice.
Restorative justice is about, like I said before, getting to the root cause and looking at discipline differently, right? Getting away from the punitive aspect. It started in the prison system, where you're trying to get the person, well, way before that, but the label of restorative justice came from, getting the offender to sit down with the one that was offended and have a conversation, right? And what I'm trying to build out now, with the restorative work, is make it a lifestyle, because I've been in schools trying to build it out. And if you're not taking the work at home, it's not really going to work inside the building. So I think when we're trying to make this thing really work, we have to make it around the clock, and take it home with us, and practice it fully. So that's how I look at restorative justice and restorative practices.
Yeah, absolutely. I've asked this question a bunch of different ways, and like I don't always get the answer that I'm looking for. So I'm going to phrase it differently this time.
Yeah.
What is a place or situation that you've witnessed recently where you're like, dang, I really wish they knew about restorative justice work? So for example, you and I both are avidly watching the playoffs, right? The NBA
Yeah.
playoffs. And when we have these fan interactions of violence towards players, and like they are quote unquote indefinitely banned,
Yeah.
right? How is that solving the problem? Yes, it's like temporary protection, but how are we like restoring that relationship, both between the player and an entitled white person who is like causing violence, but also like with the greater community?
Dude, that's an amazing question. I love that. And I'm an ex-college basketball player, and I follow basketball very closely. So that's a really good question. I think it's very similar to the school system. You do something, you get suspended, you're banned, right? Do they learn? No. So then the school to prison pipeline continues. I think also with the conversations about race and discrimination, allowing yourself, the best thing that I did, I went to an all white school, predominantly white school at SUNY Cortland, upstate New York. The best thing that I did was say, hey, I could be uncomfortable, and, go with what I'm comfortable with, the people that come from where I come from, or I could just go out there and have those uncomfortable conversations. And I had lunches. I would see people randomly in classrooms, or in the hallways, or at lunch, and just have those conversations. Why do you feel the way you feel? Like, where's that coming from? What did you go through that made you think that that's okay, right? And I think I saw the value in that because, once those conversations are started, right, you are able to, and I understand my privilege. Like, I'm very aware. Like, the way I look allows me to go in certain spaces and be able to have those conversations easier than other people, for
people
sure.
who aren't seeing you, you're light skinned.
Yes. So, I'm very, because I grew up in my family's from Puerto Rico, so my brother is like dark, right? My blood brother is dark. My grandma looks black. My dad is very fair skinned. So like I come from like a mix, and then I grew up in a black and brown community. All my friends, we'll go to the grocery store or we'll go to stores, and my friends will be followed. I wouldn't. So I'm very aware of what is going on, and my right through this work I'm living, but allowing myself to have those conversations with people and allow to address it, right? And what I'm noticing now, if you get someone to pause, that's an improvement. Like where if they're about to say a word or they're about to do something that's inappropriate or right, and they catch themselves off of the conversation you had with them, that's working in the right direction. That's what I saw in college, right? Where they'd be like, oh, my bad. Because of my presence made them feel like they had to correct themselves. The only way you get that is by having those conversations and going there. So like when it comes to these NBA arenas with the fans acting out like that, which is completely inappropriate, some conversations needs to be had because you're not fixing the problem. You're building more anger and the entitlement grows, right? And it gets them to feel like, hey, that I just get kicked out. That's wrong or whatever. And it just continues, right? Because obviously it hasn't been helping. Like after the first one, there was like 3 more that happened several days after. And it's just like, they obviously saw what happened to the person, right? So it's not fixing the problem. It's temporary, as you said. I think conversations need to be had to have an understanding and a work through the process of like, how do you not make that happen again? What is going on in your life that makes you feel like that's okay to do? Or what are you not, addressing? Because most people that react in these ways are angry about a lot more than the situation that's in front of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that was a beautiful response. And you didn't answer my question, which is the challenge of the way that I framed this, right? Like, what's a situation that you've witnessed recently that's like, oh, I wish they knew restorative justice or this way of being? Yeah.
Yeah. Because it happens constantly. Like when I see parents dealing with their children at the store or in the park or, you know what I mean? I think a parent dealing with a child outside, right? And thinking the way of discipline is to strike fear in the child, right? And not have that conversation. It reminds me, last time I saw that was a couple weekends ago. I saw that and then it immediately made me think about my situation where I would do something wrong and my mom would beat me, but there will be no explanation. And therefore it becomes, hey, I don't want to do that again because I don't want this scar again on me, right? And then me continuing it, and then me having experience with my daughter. My daughter, and this is the best way to answer this question. I saw that situation with a parent, right, disciplining their child off of something trivial that they did. The parent reacting poorly and just lashing out on her stress on the child, right? That she's not personally dealing with, put it on the child, right? By disciplining her, right? So I saw that. And then with my daughter, like recently she went on her iPad. She's 7 in her school. She has an iPad and they have to do activities on it. Then they get breaks. And on the break, she went through and I had my tablets connected to her tablet. So she bought a bunch of apps. I'm talking hundreds of dollars of apps. And I got the notifications and I was pissed. And natural reaction is like, hey, old school, like, nah, this never can happen again. But approach and learning this from my wife too is like saying, hey, I'm disappointed that this happened because we explained to you in the past why you shouldn't do this, right?
That effective statement, like leading with
Yeah,
your feelings. Yeah.
exactly. Like, this is what it did for me. This is how I felt when I got the notification on my phone, showing that I was disappointed, showing the sadness and that I felt in that moment, understanding what she just did, and then having that conversation with her on like what transpired after that. Like, because of this happens, right? And then having my daughter be able to see her reaction in that, and then see her like understand like why she shouldn't do it again, and then her coming up and get us giving her the opportunity to come up with what to do. And because it's all about patience, it's like,
Mm-hmm.
what is patience? Waiting for what you want. You felt like you went behind daddy's back because you wanted those games so bad because your friends had them, but you didn't have the patience to, you know what I mean? So like, what do we have to do to build that patience, right? And come up with techniques with her. And then ever since, it's been better, right? And seeing that and thinking like, wow, like, what I mean, where is this coming from? Like, and if you think about the history of discipline, even with black and brown people, like, where does it come from? All the way back to slavery,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where, that discipline, that beating is to build that fear so it doesn't happen again, right? And then the trauma was passed down, generational trauma, like that's how
Mm-hmm.
it was passed down. And it
That's how we
doesn't
teach you
normally,
to stay safe in the world, by teaching you
exactly.
like these are things to do to not get hurt.
Exactly. Exactly. And we have never really seen, right, the effects of the other way. And now we're trying to figure that out with this restored. And this is why it's so weird where, for people to actually unlearn that and do it this way and see the benefits. It's a lot of like work that we have to do within ourselves, because natural reactions are like, hey, do what you were told, do what you were seeing, what you seen growing up, or do what was done to you. And this is like hundreds and hundreds of years passed down. So like, but like seeing the benefits of it. And I think getting people to do it in their own lives, you start seeing the benefits so that it can start being done within the schools. Me seeing it done with my daughter brings it full circle when I do it with a child.
Mm.
When it's natural reaction, the kid is tripping and bugging out, and I could take it personally, or I could see that as a cry for help, and then build the skills to like, have that not repeat itself with the understanding of why and how, right? And I think on a deeper level, when kids react, I see my father and I see my daughter. And I think if we could get teachers, staff within schools to see somebody in their lives when they see these children, these students, it will bridge the gap of being able to implement the restorative practices earlier.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
I able to answer the question this time?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Definitely. And I think like one of the things for me is everybody talks about family, and I think that's true. I'm trying to figure out a way to like get people to think like the not so like serious intro, because like in the big scheme of things, like somebody got popcorn thrown on them. Is that dehumanizing? Yes. Is that perpetuating like, and I'm cutting this out of the podcast, but like, is this perpetuating like vicious cycles of like ownership of Black bodies? Like, I paid for my ticket, so I get to do whatever I want for you. Yes. And like, that is not the most serious problem in the world. Like, so like, yeah. And like, I think like the way that you reacted in your analysis of that was also okay. So maybe it's just on me to bring the like more trivial, fantastical, like out there thing, and then like let the guests ground it. I'm still
Yeah,
learning.
I think that's important. I think those are great conversations to have. I have this conversation. My wife is a Black woman, so
Mm-hmm.
like I have these conversations constantly, right? And she brings that up. Like, there's a deeper, like, even these trivial things,
Mm-hmm.
that's passed down trauma that they're not even aware of. Like you said, the popcorn being thrown on someone, and the idea of it being the I paid my ticket over this Black body, like, you have to, you know what I mean? Like, it does connect on a deeper level. And then being able to have these conversations, we're like, this is a thing. What are we afraid of? Why are we afraid to make them uncomfortable? We have to make them uncomfortable. The only way you get better is by being uncomfortable, right? I have learned from being uncomfortable. That is what accountability is, having people check you, right? But when it comes to this type of stuff, like people, one, even the last president doesn't like to be kept accountable, right? Because they never had to, right? They're not used to accountability. We need to create spaces where accountability is more normalized
Yeah.
across the board. Like, why did you do that? Like, even seeing children, like I'm dealing with kindergarten kids right now, and you see it. You see it right now in kindergarten kids, 5, 6 years old. Like, I'm addressing it. I'm addressing those things now. Like, why do you feel the need to tell every time I'm the only black student? I don't say that. Like, I don't say the only black student, but I'm like, I see it, and then I'm addressing it, right? In kindergarten terms, like, why do you feel you need to tell on David every time? Where is that coming from when he just did the same thing in front of you, but you didn't have this? You know what I mean? And it's just like, it starts very young, but are they ever held accountable? And kindergarten teachers, right? I'm seeing too, there's so much going on where I can see how easily it is. Like, don't do that. Hey, stop, or discipline the child. And then the kid gets used to being told on. The kid gets used to being the one that's doing wrong. Imagine what that does to the psyche as they're going through school and then the world, right?
Yeah,
That it all connects. So I think it's important that you brought that up.
for sure, for sure. You get to sit in circle with 4 people, dead or alive. Who are they, and what is the question you ask the circle?
Oh, whoo, dead or alive, for sure. Jay-Z. I would love to, even in his last album, you saw a lot of that work being done. 444, where he talks about, you know, identifying what he's done in his relationship with his mother, with his wife. So, like, seeing his process would be interesting. So, him, you said 4 people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without me included, right?
You and 4 others.
All right, me and 4 others. Jay-Z for sure. I would like to get Tupac in there for sure. I think he was a very complex person, just to pick his mind. Um, let me see here. Nelson Mandela, and this is tough. This is really hard. 4 people to sit down with. Then I got to come up with a question. So I have Jay-Z, Nelson Mandela, Tupac, um, my dad. Yeah, my dad. Because I think my dad would have, I've always wished my dad had more um, conversations with men and sit in these type of spaces with people that have done different things in their lives, right? And had different perspectives.
Yeah.
So I think those 4 people. And the question that I would ask is, what are you afraid, or what were you afraid of most growing up that people knew, right? What were you afraid that people will know
Oh,
about you?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the question. Like, whether now or growing up that you had to get over.
Yeah.
And
Same
I
question
think
to you.
okay, go on.
I'll go first. I'll go first.
Yeah.
I oh man, I do have to think about it. I remember I think it's just like that I felt like I was a weird kid and I was just trying to fit in. And like I know that's not concrete, but oh man. They're like yeah, like my 4th grade class knew this, but like there was like a straight up week where I like spoke as if I was Pikachu, right? And like, you know, my best friend Carlos at the time, where like when we were hanging out, like he like fully embraced me and accepted that, and like everyone else was just like, what the hell is happening, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like, you know, you learn to hide those like weird things about yourself, right? Those things that are abnormal, or like not conforming. And so like, you know, the whole like pika pika, or like, you know, and so like, you know, I started to just hide those things and not be as open. And I think like that as trivial as it is, like, for a 10-year-old to be thinking about those things, like, I do think that had like lasting impact. I can think about like other times in 8th grade where I'd be excited to share something that like I thought like other people might think was weird, or not normal or uncool. So growing up, like, just like those unique things about me that I like really want to nerd out about,
Yeah.
I don't know how they'll be accepted.
Yeah. That's a good one. Thank you for sharing that. I think for me, something that I had to get over, and I fully own now, is people knowing that I wasn't about the whole, although I engaged in it and I fully fit the stereotype of a student athlete, the popular kid that, dated the girls that, everybody was into and, was active and whatnot. I was into monogamy and building my way to be a good husband and the whole, you know, I was very like my favorite type of movie was a romantic comedy. I was into like, I grew up on The Fresh Prince, so seeing Uncle Phil have that household and that love, and seeing a powerful man, um, go through his things, but always be able to say, I love you to his wife and care so much and care for his family. I always wanted that. And I wanted to build that. So me struggling to find myself as a kid because I did what I thought I had to. Like I had my dad telling me I had to. I had uncles, I had cousins to be like, hey, just get with that girl or do this or, be like this with women. And I never was like that. I always wanted to get to know um, the women that I was engaging with and actually work on getting closer to being the husband that I am today. And I'm still growing and learning. And but I think that's something that I feared people knowing because of the image of the man that I had to pretend to be, right? And like, kind of like that's why Jay-Z's last album was very influential to me, seeing how he was able to put that all down, like someone that at his um, level of success and achievement, like for him to say, you know what, none of that matters. I think is powerful. I would have enjoyed having that album 10 years earlier, you know what I mean? 10, 20 years, 15 years earlier, where I would have been like, oh yeah, for sure. You know what I mean? But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing to fear. And I would have loved to hear the other perspectives in that circle that I have from those people to talk about with.
Yeah, for sure. Um, it's always interesting. People always pick men.
Mm. I think
Primarily
for
pick men.
yeah, I think for me it's because and I talked about this with my wife yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Like men don't have these conversations. If look, for example, and I say this all the time, and now I'm having more and more of these conversations with men about marriage,
Mm-hmm.
about fatherhood. Like men don't, we're not trained to, we're just trained to like provide and we're not taught about postpartum depression. We're not taught about what the women goes through or whatever. And we just have to deal. Like I cried when my baby was born. I was amazing during pregnancy. Like I was great. I was doing everything. The moment my daughter was born, I realized I have never been around a baby. Like I was, I was, I lied to you not. I was in a hospital, like sobbing, like I'm gonna drop, I'm gonna break her. Like I don't know what to do. Like and like I've never told that to a man. So like having to have those conversations and be vulnerable with men, for me in particular, I think more men, more boys need to see that more often. So for me, picking men to have those conversations is something that I would like to see because it hasn't been done as often about topics that will help men be better men in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because like it generally follows the pattern of like someone in your family line, an artist, historical figure like Mandela, and like you went with another artist, but like it's
Yeah.
always kind of that mix. Often men like, Malcolm X, MLK,
Yeah.
Obama, like
Oh, Malcolm
yeah,
X.
yeah,
Yes,
all
yes,
those
yes.
people. What is one affirmation or mantra that you want to leave everyone listening with?
This is hard. Good. Good one. I'm gonna go with what I usually say with my dad. Thinking about my dad. Every generation is supposed to do better than the last. Your job is to make your last name greater than its past.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever was being done um, in your household or in your family, um, unlearning and breaking the cycle is okay, so that you can make the next generation better, right? So, for example, um, before my parents' generation, it was about education, getting everybody to go to college, right? And then now it's about, okay, we get to college, let's understand how to be financially free, right? And trauma free, right? Well, not trauma free, understand your trauma and have those conversations. So like for me, it's like, my mom and dad did a good job of getting me to where I'm at. Now my job is to pass the baton and have my daughter be further than me. Um, and then, continue that pattern. So that's what I would leave. I think about that mantra a lot, the little quote that I came up with a couple years ago. Every generation is supposed to do better than the last. Your job is to make your last name greater than its past. Um, so I'm gonna go with that one.
Two more questions. Who's one person that I should have on this podcast? And you got to hook it up if you know them.
Someone that I would like to see on this podcast on restorative practices. Anita already.
She hasn't been on, so you can like hit her up and be like,
She hasn't been on?
No, she hasn't been
Nah.
on.
I'm gonna get Anita on here. Anita
Okay.
needs to be on here. Anita needs to be. Look, I got into, this is the connection with me and Anita. Like, I got into restorative justice at the KIPP High School, and the principal knew Anita, and she was my mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Anita was the one that taught me about curriculum, taught me about like running this course that I built. I did presentations at her school. I brought my kids to her school, and vice versa. Her kids came to my school. Like, she helped me build this whole thing that I'm doing now at KIPP High School when I was hired as a restorative justice coordinator. And she was the best. So like, I learned from her. She built her restorative program within her school over 6 years, where it was like crazy, where her students were like handling stuff. Her students were going around dealing with stuff that was going on campus, and I was just like, whoa. So like, that's where I was like, all right, this needs to be like something normalized. Kids need to be student to student accountability. It can't just be teachers coming in or deans. It has to be a holistic, right? So I got that all from her. She's amazing. I would highly recommend Anita to be on this podcast, and she's a great mind to pick.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to be looking forward for that nudge email, like, hey, find some time this summer. And then last question, finally, how and where can people support you and your work in the ways that you want to be supported?
Everything is on my website, cjmotivation.com. Very simple. My Instagram, cjmotivation. Everything you can find on my website. My book is on Amazon, Translating Your Success. Very easy read. Every chapter is 3 to 4 pages long. At the end of each chapter are reflection questions for the students or the reader to do the work with themselves. So the first chapter, as I talked about, is about how I found out addiction was real and how I had to learn how to switch my questions up so I can understand my father. The first question in the book is, who do you need to talk to? write down the questions you need to ask. Go have that conversation and reflect on what happened from that conversation. So this is actually like a tool that people can use to start the work in their life. I talk about being a son, athlete, father, husband, all different aspects of my life. Every chapter is different. I hated reading growing up. My mom's an educator. She forced me to read. So the first book that I read was The Alchemist, cover to cover. And it inspired me to, create something that would be easy to read for students and anybody, and then just start doing the work with themselves. So this aligns to the work that I'm doing. You can find that on Amazon. And yeah, I'm on
the
also
website,
the
socials,
website.
all there, and we'll get those all linked in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Carlos, for all the time and the wisdom that you've dropped for me, and everybody else benefited too, I guess. Is there anything else that you want to leave people with?
Yeah. So what I do is I help implement restorative practice curriculum within schools, and then I also train people to build their own curriculum. So I do a bunch of different things. But if you want to connect to that, also hit me up through my email. That's on my website. Everything's on my website, CJ Motivation. If you want to, either collab on a school event or implementation of curriculum to make it holistic, or just have a conversation about learning about the work and bringing it to your school differently. So I'm open to that. But I appreciate you, David, for having me on, having this conversation, and I appreciate you, and I look forward to building a relationship with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much, Carlos, for all that you've shared. You know how to get a hold of him. All those links are going to be in the show notes. So next week, we'll have another episode with another amazing guest. Until then, take care, and we'll see you next week.
Wow. Thank you so much, Carlos, for this wonderful episode. One of the big messages that Carlos both showed and spoke about was practicing vulnerability. Vulnerability is how we're able to form relationships, how we're able to form meaningful bonds with other people, and that is what makes the world work. Carlos also mentioned the fact that masculinity has a lot of ties to vulnerability, because oftentimes men are told that they can't be vulnerable and that is not their role and they have to be strong. But vulnerability is strength. How can we reframe the way that we think about vulnerability? Because sharing your story is strength. BIPOC voices as well have been taught to stay strong because the repercussions of making a mistake are greater. But Carlos really broke down how to be vulnerable both as a man and a person of color. Along with this conversation about vulnerability, he brought up the idea of how you need to find yourself. Sometimes I find that I am not even vulnerable with myself, which makes it impossible to find out who you are. As soon as you are able to name emotions and feel deeply and understand your own vulnerability, that is when you can find who you are and then extend your personality and who you are to other people to form meaningful connections. How do you practice vulnerability? Finally, I wanted to connect the idea that Carlos brought up right at the beginning of the episode. Align who you are and what you do with your lifestyle. How do you use who you are to inform what you do and how you live? Thank you so much for listening to this episode today, and don't forget to check out all of our socials in the show notes below. And thank you so much for tuning in this week and every week.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, rocking our new merch, joining our Patreon, or signing up for a workshop. So many options! Links to everything in the show notes and on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.